I think the entire time I was doing the introduction, I had my video turned off. This is episode one, everyone. So this is where we mess up. So, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your mission there at the Oneida Square Project?
Well, Tom, as you said in my introduction, our mission in the neighborhood is really to address the pretty significant inequities in economic opportunity and social opportunities in our neighborhood. And there's a lot of blight and neglect and a lot of just a lot of unhealthy things in our neighborhood. So we're attempting to just be good neighbors and actually live there in the neighborhood, where so many have abandoned that neighborhood to the suburbs. We actually want to live there, be good neighbors, and help with these inequities that exist.
Now, Mike, if I understand your story accurately, you're not a native to the Oneida Square neighborhood. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. I grew up in the Adirondacks of upstate New York, and it's not urban at all.
Okay. So, what kind of drove you to move into this neighborhood? Was it a desire to make a difference?
Yeah, actually, it was just seeing that no one really cared. Everyone's living in the suburbs and moving to the suburbs and just watching the decay of the city and seemingly not doing anything about it. And our church was in the suburbs, and we had lots of people and lots of money and budget resources, but no one really, they didn't really need us. And then the city, there was, very few churches, and the churches that are there are very, under-resourced, and there's so much need. And so we thought, that doesn't make sense. How come the place with the greatest need has the least resources, and the place with the least need has the greatest resources? So we thought maybe we'd try and address that. But by moving there, then we lost most of our resources as the suburban people were a little scared away by the city.
Oh, that's interesting. So, imagine it took a bit of courage to, make this move and kind of announce that to the folks that were in the suburbs and kind of
Yeah,
with you at that time.
I'd like to think it was courage, but some might say gross incompetence. Um, but we did it, and we were glad to do it. And it changed our lives as a church. We were needed.
You didn't lose everyone, did you?
No, no, but we probably lost about maybe 60% of our church over the first couple years moving to the city.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
It is. It is.
So I get what you say about losing a lot of the resources. It's the congregation and the community that helps drive the church
Right.
financially. So
Right. We lost the
um,
financial and the human resources. But what it did though was for the people who stayed there, they were really galvanized to the mission, and the morale of the church was so much higher than it had ever been when we were a lot bigger, because everyone who was there really wanted to be there.
that's pretty important. That's one of the things I always like to say is people will do great things when what they value aligns with what you want them to do, and I like that
Yes.
term galvanizing.
Yeah, it was. It was very galvanizing, to bring us together for something that had more meaning. When we were in the suburbs, really, we just felt like we were entertaining people on Sunday, and nothing was really happening during the week. And now we found that there's a great need in our neighborhood. And what we found out too is it's not us that are just giving. We receive so much by getting to know people who are different than our experiences in the suburbs, and being around people that are different from us and have different perspectives. And that was far more rewarding, and realized that we needed that too.
So tell me a little about the folks in the neighborhood who already lived there when you showed up. How
Right.
how
Our
how
neighborhood
did they
is
accept it?
very low income. A lot of elderly people who grew up in the neighborhood and watched the neighborhood change from when they grew up in the neighborhood. It was mainly a working class white um, Polish and German neighborhood where everyone worked in the in the factories in the city, or the breweries very close too. A lot of people worked at the brewery, and and a lot of the mills. I mean, because Utica was a lot more, a lot busier, had a lot more industry, in the early 20th century, and then as it became more of a Rust Belt city, and the industry left, the neighborhoods decayed, people moved away, and people fled the city to the suburbs, and so we had a lot of elderly who watched, their neighborhood change, and then we have a lot of low-income people and a lot more diversity, a lot of minorities in our neighborhood, and that's really what our neighborhood was like when we
How
moved there.
how welcoming were they when you kind of showed up and said, "Hi, I'm Pastor Mike, and I'm here to help."
Well, it's funny because you really need to be humble, because it's like, people come through all the time and are like, hey, I'm here to help, and then they don't end up staying. So people are like, yeah, we'll believe you're here to help after you've been here for about 5 or 6 years. And so you got to earn your street cred, so to speak, with people, because you gotta live there and be a part of the neighborhood. So there's that skepticism, like, yeah, you're just another flavor of the month that's going to come through and try to save us, and then you're going to be gone when it's too hard. And then there's also the more, let's say, the unhealthy element of the neighborhoods that were participating in criminal activity, drugs, gangs. Nobody likes someone who's going to come into the neighborhood and shed light on that and work with the police and work with community people to try and clean that up. So you don't endear yourself to the gang elements. However, and we had some pretty interesting things. Like I had. Our front windows were shot out with a BB gun after we had replaced them with like new replacement windows. They got shot out. My van windows were smashed in my parking lot behind my house, and stuff like that. Things stolen, and then people intimidating us a little bit. But I think once that we made it clear that we weren't leaving and that we were here for the long haul and that we actually did care for people, things turned around. And so even some of the gang kids that were hostile at first came to know that we cared about them. We weren't, excited about the criminal activity, but we cared about them as people. And then that really turned around, and we've made some pretty good relationships.
So
However,
go ahead.
it always changes. It's not like a once and for all. You have to keep it up because people move in and out of the neighborhood. So you have to prove yourself all the time.
Okay, so there's kind of an ebb and flow. And how would you say, would you say you've seen a reduction in the crime in that neighborhood, in the past
Yeah.
5 years?
Well, definitely, because first of all, I think having some new people from the church move into the neighborhood, including my family and a couple other families, it just encouraged the people who had maybe given up and thought it wasn't possible to work with the police anymore because no one cared, or that it was never going to be helpful, it's just futile, to empower them to feel like, oh yeah, we can try again and care about our neighborhood. I think that helped, and so we created a community garden. We've rehabbed 2 houses in the neighborhood. We're working on 2 more, and so those changes are significant. And when people see that, then they start taking care of their homes better, start picking up litter, doing things like that are important, and caring about the crime in the neighborhood.
How does the community garden work? Is that, say, a collective effort, and do the folks in the
Yeah.
neighborhood get to purchase or get the food from it?
What we did was there was 3 city lots that were in the middle of our block that were just vacant and full of people used it for parking their cars or throwing trash, and it was just ugly and just a collection of it wasn't even as nice as, remember, like in Fat Albert in the junkyard. It wasn't even that nice. So um, uh, so there was no kids playing instruments,
So
with the, yeah,
so it
it
was
was
like class
ugly.
at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
school at no 3 o'clock in the morning. No
No
class.
class. Yeah, exactly. So, um, we bought those from the city for a low price, and then got some funding from a neighborhood organization that funds projects like that, and we built the garden and reclaimed it and planted grass and put raised beds in, and then invited people from the neighborhood to, if they want to take a raised bed for free, then it can be theirs, and then as long as they commit to planting and taking care of the crops, then it's their raised bed, and those are about like 8 by 4 feet raised beds.
And you can grow quite a bit of food in
You
a
can.
that
It's
size of a garden.
it's amazing. Or some people just put in flowers because they wanted to beautify the neighborhood and they just wanted to grow their own flowers and teach their kids how to grow things.
Either way, I imagine it had an uplifting effect just by taking out all the trash and probably
It
like the
did.
cars up on blocks and whatnot.
It really beautified the neighborhood, and people appreciated it.
Huh.
Yeah.
And so, as I look back on your bio, and it said you started this in 2009, it's about 5 years later. So
Yep.
it sounds like you've made it past that tipping point, at least in general. Like you said,
Yeah.
it's an ebb and flow because of the
Yeah.
movement of folks.
But people know we're here in the neighborhood to stay, and so they know that what to expect from us.
Mike, talk a little bit about the values that drove you to do this. Let's take a step back and say, all right, Mike, um, you put your whole career, let's say, at risk. You put your some would say you put your family at risk in doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Tell me about the values that compelled you to do it despite all of that risk.
Yeah. Well, the greatest value I think is to care for your neighbor as yourself. I mean, being a pastor, Jesus says that the greatest good is to love your neighbor as yourself, and so seeing that need in the city and the neglect made me feel like, well, if I'm not going to do it, then who's going to do it? Nobody's doing it now, and I felt that that would be worthwhile, and it really has been, because it hasn't been just about us giving and not receiving anything. I mean, we have more resources, given our better economic opportunities, but then moving into the neighborhood and partnering with people, we've learned, so much more about seeing the world from different perspectives from people. And so, people could say it was a risk, but the reward was great by getting to be a part of seeing life in a way that we never would have seen it before.
Right, and I think as you said, love is probably the most significant value. Most of it's the reason why we have all of the other values. So,
Right.
would you say, your desire to love your neighbor drove you to have the courage,
Yeah.
helped you find your way through things that looked like,
Right.
oh, this just seems impossible, but we're going to try it
Right.
because we want to spread love.
Right. And love's not abstract. I mean, if it doesn't have um, tangible things that go with it, if there's not, so I always like to say, if our neighborhood is not tangibly better because of our presence as a church, then we are not doing our job. So if crime doesn't get better, if kids aren't better cared for, if the economic opportunities don't grow, if the neighborhood doesn't look better, if the litter's not picked up, then we're not doing our job in the neighborhood, which is we're not tangibly loving them, because we could say, oh, we're here in the neighborhood, and we love you, but if we're not doing anything about it, then that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, it's one thing to talk about values and words like love. It's another thing to actually personify them and
Right.
show that those things to the people
Right.
that you care about.
Because people have heard, I mean, people have heard promises, and even the government's thrown money at these issues, but without relationship that goes along with it, it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't, and we've seen it doesn't get very far.
Okay. So I think that's great. Mike, help me. What else is going on? We talked a little bit about the garden. I think you mentioned something about rehabilitating houses. How's that going so far?
Well, the first house we rehabilitated was ours, my wife's and mine and our son Noah. We bought a house, which from relatively speaking, very low market value in the city, and then that enabled us to use our equity from our home in the suburbs to do a lot of the rehabilitation. And so, for example, in Utica, you can buy a house, a three-story house, for $30,000, and that's on the high end. And so we bought our house for right around $30,000, and then we had some equity from our house that was like 1/5 its size in the suburbs to redo it. And but then we also needed some private support from people in the church who also believed in what we're doing, and we never would have been able to do it without their help. because banks don't loan in low-income neighborhoods mortgages under $50,000, and you can't find a house for over $50,000, so you can't get mortgages. So then the church leadership stepped up, and individuals and the church the church as well, acted as the bankers for myself and two other families, so that we could be able to buy the houses and do the work that they required. Because there's a lot of lead paint issues, a lot of asbestos, all that kind of stuff.
And you're, just to be clear too, I think you're not trying to take over the neighborhood with a bunch
No.
of relocated suburbanites. You're trying to create a community.
Is what you're saying, yeah. That's a big buzzword, is gentrification, meaning kick out the low-income people and bring in the mid to higher income, and that wasn't our goal at all. In fact, what we were trying to do is we thought that the best neighborhood is always a mixed neighborhood, but currently in our neighborhood there weren't any middle income. So by coming in and providing a few middle income people, then we create a mixed neighborhood. But by no means do we want to push low income out of the neighborhood. We want to support them.
So, okay, sounds like a great story so far. Now, tell me, what have your biggest challenges been as you've gone through this journey?
Well, one of the things that I think it was good that when we moved into our house, it's a two-family house, and a young couple from church that was just having their first kid moved in on the second floor. And doing it in a team at first was really helpful, because it can get really discouraging. Like I said, when our windows got shot out, when our people in the neighborhood were taunting us or yelling things at us or throwing trash in our yard or just being hostile, you need some support right there on the ground, or you feel really discouraged. And so in the early days, that was really helpful. And we couldn't have done it without having another couple here with us, because it's hard. I mean, when you do something like this, you have to know there's going to be opposition and it's going to be hard. And as we look back, we're super glad we did it, but those were hard days early on, because the neighborhood was a little hostile.
Yeah, and I think that's where having drawing back on your values is really important part. You had to probably really question. At certain points, you were probably questioning, why am I doing this? And it would,
Yes.
Was there a voice inside saying,
Yeah.
because it's right, because you.
Well, this is crazy, is the voice a lot of times, because people even say, well, you're endangering your family. You're not being responsible. How could you put them in that situation? And that's one of those things where you have to say, but our values are to love our neighbors, and you can't love your neighbor. I have a great friend who's another minister in town, and she says that ghetto tourists never help the city. You got to live there, and so you can't just come in on a weekend, slap some paint on stuff, and go back to the suburbs. You got to live there, and so we highly value relationships, and so you can't do relationships from afar, like genuine relationships. So that's one of the values that got us through, was our strong value of relationship and our strong value of community, doing things together. So we didn't do this on our own. We did this with the help of a family who lived with us, and then lots of other people in the church who helped us fix up our house, who provided the capital to do the improvements. I mean, it was a community project, and we value community. You can't do it without community.
Right, you can't personify love to the people in the neighborhood if you aren't there to do it.
Right. And exactly, because we're not here to be like the Lone Rangers and say, hey, here we are. We've come to save the neighborhood. We're coming to be a neighbor, to be part of the system that exists and help it, not create something new. So we can, it's all about being part of community.
I think that's a pretty unique look on how to really help people. Is there's one thing to have all of the financial or human resources available, and like you said earlier, throw money at it. It's quite another to invest yourself into such an endeavor, in your whole life into it.
Right, and I don't think you can do it without being like that, because people don't want to feel like you're condescending or that you feel superior. Like, what you're coming to say is, we value you as equals and we want to help, not that we have something greater to offer. We know that you're beleaguered, you're tired, you're overwhelmed. We want to help tip the scales back in a way that'll make you inspired to care about your neighborhood.
I think that's great. How about mistakes? Any time throughout here where you felt like you were getting results, but maybe you weren't real satisfied with some of the things you were doing?
all kinds of mistakes. Like I mentioned, the mistake of thinking that you can do it all yourself, or that you have something better to offer. Um, so, for example, I'll give you how that worked. Is whenever there's and if you have problems with a neighbor in the neighborhood, for those of us who maybe grew up in the suburbs or somewhere else, your first thought is, well, I'll call the police. But in this neighborhood, calling the police doesn't endear you to your neighbors, and it doesn't necessarily solve anything. So, sometimes there'd be a fight in the street, and I'd call the police right away, and then everyone's like, oh, that there's the people that call the police all the time, and then they would step not be want to get close to us because they and so we had to learn that sometimes there's diplomacy that's better. So once you get to know people in the neighborhood and you have a problem with someone, you learn the neighborhood networks. And so, for example, there was a kid at the end of the street who was harassing some people, and rather than calling the police or confronting him, I happened to know a friend who knew his uncle. So I told my friend, hey, there's a kid on our block that's kind of out of control. You know his uncle. Could you talk to his uncle and have his uncle talk to him? And then that worked far better than calling the police, because his uncle came over and said, you better straighten up. uh, and he listened to his uncle, and he didn't. Do you see what I'm saying? Is neighborhood diplomacy goes a lot farther than always calling in, the police. Even though there are times when people are getting hurt or in danger, you have to call the police. But that's one thing we learned, was relying too much on outside institutions rather than neighborhood relationships. So that took a while to figure that out.
But I think that's probably a great lesson to be able to share with other people who
Right.
may want to do something like this.
Right. You have to know the neighborhood networks. You have to know who the chiefs are, so to speak, and who the power players are that have the respect of the people. And you have to go through those channels and show respect. Um,
What's next, Mike?
well, before one other thing too is that local government was hard to work with, and I think every
Ah,
local government is hard to work with, just because they are overwhelmed, they are short-staffed, they have no budgets, everyone's always on them, and so they have a hard time seeing the bigger picture. They're just trying to survive or not get fired or win the next election. And so you can't really depend on them for everything. You have to work with them and be respectful, but you have to find private partnerships and build coalitions, not just depend on like the local government to be your savior, because they can't and they won't. And so that's one thing we learned about that as well.
I think it's interesting what you said. For me, and kind of thinking back on the GPS theory model, when I look at how when folks are kind of driven by the results, when they only
Right.
look at what's in it for them, and
Right.
trying to either maintain the status quo, it virtually paralyzes them because they tend to. And I've been there before, so I'm not trying to judge anybody.
Yeah.
I've lived that. Don't get me wrong, but I see I can see the difference between someone who is just trying to say maintain the status quo, whatever little bit of the world that they've got a hold of and not let
Yeah.
go, versus
Yeah.
someone who's trying to give friendship
Right.
and love and create a community.
Right.
It there's a whole different power level here, or level
Yeah.
of powerfulness. Not that you're after power, but the
Right.
power that you're creating in the community is sounds
Right.
pretty significant.
Well, and I had to check my ego as well, because I'm like, why don't you care? I mean, why don't you help us? Why don't you think what we're doing is awesome? Because we think what we're doing is awesome, and they just they don't often have the time or the luxury of seeing things like that. And you know, they're in a bureaucracy that's not doesn't lend itself to that kind of thinking. So I try to give them a break and not be judgy, but I would rather stick something in my eye than go to City Hall to do anything.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. No, not to judge anyone. It's just,
Yeah.
they've made decisions to get where they are, and now they've got
Right.
to, if they want to keep creating the value that they want to create,
Right.
they have to stay there.
But I will
And so,
say, if you do find an ally, you need to really nurture that relationship, which we have done. So I've been able to find some good people who do really care, and I really nurture those relationships. Just like, simple thing, like I send Christmas cards to the people in the city government that I think really work hard, and I thank them for that. And people really like that, and uh, and they, so I try to build the relationships with the people who I think really are our allies, and and it's really helped. And so I have someone in the codes department who I can call right away if I have a problem, and she'll get right on it because she really likes what we're doing, and things like that. And I have someone now in the urban and economic that really likes what we're doing. So if you nurture those relationships, again, it's about relationships. You build relationships with people who have similar goals and values, and then you form powerful coalitions.
Yeah, and then there's no telling what you can accomplish once you hit a certain a certain
Right.
point, a certain critical mass, and
Exactly. And you have to be patient because it takes time. Like, we've only been at it 5 years. Like, on the one hand, to be like, wow, 5 years, but on the other hand, it's only been 5 years, and so it takes a while to build those coalitions and for people to see that you are not just the next flavor that's going to be gone.
awesome. Mike, tell us what's next. What's anything on the
Well,
horizon?
well, what's next is, as much as we value relationships, and that's really my strength as a leader. What I'm learning this year, especially as a leader, is that my style of leadership that's highly relational and one-on-one can only get you so far. And so I'm really trying to build leadership um, in the church that can take this thing to the next level, the next generation of leaders, and I don't want the church to be in our not-for-profit organization that if something happened to me tomorrow, it would just fall apart because I'm doing everything. And like I said, my relational approach tends to be disorganized and chaotic and just kind of spur of the moment, like um, kind of like you know, just the next thing. I'm always reacting, and so I really need to surround myself with people who are better planners, organizers, and that can help take the relationships that we build and put some organization to it, so that we can be viable and survive into the future. And without me.
And I think that's really an important point. It's very similar with people who start up new companies. Are they the CEO at the startup is
Yeah.
not always the same CEO as the one who grows it into
Right.
something more significant. And so having I just recently was at a workshop where an angel investor said, "Hey, we're looking for the person who says whatever's best for this company." And what I hear you saying is whatever's best for this community is okay with me, even if it means I'm not driving the bus 100% of
Exactly.
the time.
Exactly. Because I can't, and I think my skill set was good for planting the seeds and building the foundation, but now I need people to really develop the organization. And I see myself more being the face of the organization, and building, strengthening ties in the community and building coalitions. But I really see that I need to develop leaders to really build our organization and our churches.
Do you have the folks there? Are you still
Yeah. What
looking?
what I've done is I've identified people who are already really active, who are committed to our values and our vision, and who just need some empowering, some inspiration, and a nudge to. Because it's funny, I had a couple meetings throughout the year, and I said, look, I want to um, impart leadership. I want to empower you. I want to give leadership to the next generation. Everyone's like, "Oh, great!" And then like the meeting was done, and then nothing happened. And then I had another meeting. I'm like, "No, really, seriously, that's what I want to do." And everyone's like, "Oh, great, yeah, yeah, yeah." And then nothing ever happened. So it dawned on me from the advice of one of the young people, was like, "Mike, I think you need to actually probably invite people, be purposeful, and be more purposeful about mentoring, which is relational as well." And so that's the track that I'm taking now. Is I really have chosen a group of people that I want to mentor, and help them take, and not just mentor in my vision, but say, hey, you're the future of the church and in this organization. What do you see? How do you take our values and make it your own for the next generation? And then giving them the keys and just kind of helping them, is what I
Amazing.
want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's great because now you're actually opening the door for this community to become more than even what you imagine,
Right.
which is probably a part of what you always envision in the first place.
Right.
Some kind of a legacy, not your legacy, but a legacy for the community that it could move on.
Right, right. And so, that's what I'm trying to do. And we'll see how that goes. I'm just in that process right now. So maybe we'll see you in a little while and tell you how that's going.
Yeah, yeah, and let us know how we can help.
Yeah.
And on that note, how can people help? Is there anything specific we can share with folks who might be watching this about how they can help?
Well, I think one way to help is always support and encouragement, and just sharing stories of similar maybe experiences, and what has helped, and what has worked and not worked, and people's individual stories. And then and I'm always open to really good thinkers who have good advice, who think really creatively, because one of the things about, I think, what you've noticed about business, and I even see it in the church is not a business, but in many ways you have to run it like a business, because it does have financial responsibilities, and it does have to exist into the future. And churches used to always just exist by donor support, but that's really changing in today's world. And so our church can't exist alone, especially reaching out to the poorest in our community. We can't exist just on our own parishioners' support. We have to branch out, and that's why we're doing uh, social enterprises that will employ people, then also bring in another revenue stream into the church, and then also doing trying to partner with other organizations financially and with resources. And what I'm saying is, to run a church and guide a church in this time in our history is I mean, it's always probably been challenging, but it's more challenging now because you have to be really creative. So I really would love to hear creative thinkers who, and not just have from the church context, because it could be from any context, really help us understand how in this day and age you make an organization viable and healthy, human resource wise, and monetarily.
And you just used the word organization, which is the word I usually try to use instead of business, because to me
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if we're talking about two people who are going to the movies, or a city or a state government, or
Right.
or a church. It's about people who want to create mutually beneficial relationships, and
Exactly.
both sides have to see the value proposition. And so I can
Yeah.
see how you walked in and said, all right, we know we're not going to communicate this value proposition, at least in a meaningful way, to our neighbors, at least for a few years.
Yeah.
And they've communicated that too, but over time that the value proposition of both sides has been realized, and can continue
Right.
to grow from there.
Right.
And I think that's important.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I just think that every organization needs really good thinkers who are willing to try different things and innovative things. And so even the church needs innovation. It's important.
Mike, you mentioned you're interested in talking with folks. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Is there a way people could get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Oh yeah, I would love to hear people's thoughts, ideas. I can be reached at Mike at cornerstoneutica.com, and if you don't know how to spell Utica, it's uh, CornerstoneUtica.com. So again, it's Mike at cornerstoneutica.com. You can reach me there, or our website, cornerstoneutica.com,
Great.
and you can see all the things that we're doing.
So there's lots of news and photos and things like that on your website?
Yeah, events, photos, ways that you can be involved, all kinds of different things.
Great. Mike, is there anything you wanna leave us with?
Well, I
Really
just want to
appreciate
say
the time.
thanks, Boom, for inviting me to do this, and I really appreciate it. Um, the opportunity to share, and I think the opportunity to share is really important because I learn best in community and in conversation. And so if we can develop a conversation amongst people, that would be great. And so I think this is a good way to do it.
Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you being a part of the first episode. I hope the first couple minutes work out so we don't have to do all this again.
Well, as Star
Uh,
Wars has taught us, the first episode is always the best. Oh wait, no, that's not. Sorry.
so I got to get through the first three, so episode 4, right? That's when
Exactly.
things get better.
We
Okay.
have to make it
Well,
through Jar Jar Binks, yeah.
so I will say then it's not if episode 1 stinks, it's not because of the conversation that Mike brought. It's because of my technical skills in the front end, and I will definitely make him a part. We will not kill him off by a Jedi in episodes 2 through 3. He'll be back soon.
Yes. And, and if you did kill me, I would only become stronger and more powerful.
That is true.
Yes.
Okay, Obi-Wan. Well, Michael, thank you very much. We're going to close the broadcast down and have a great evening, and really appreciate you being a part of BoomShare episode 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you.